Good afternoon and welcome to this live broadcast. And today we're going to be discussing, is the US bringing the war home? And the militarization of the Caribbean and Latin American region. A very important topic, a very timely topic. And Mr. Corbin, Mr. Fred Corbin, will be joining us on the live this afternoon. And Mr. Corbin is he's joining us from Barbados, and he is native of Barbados himself, and he's an engineer, and he will be talking to us about this very, very important and timely matter. Now, let me see if I could put Mr. Corbin here on the stage. Mr. Corbin, I don't know how to put you in.
There we go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining, Mr. Corbin. How are you this afternoon?
Good afternoon, Andrew, and good afternoon to all of our audience. I'm fine, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And you can tell them your podcast. Mr. Corbin also has a podcast, any books, anything that you'd like them to know in terms of reaching you and how they can interact with your work.
Well, most of my work is spontaneous. I don't really have a channel or anything like that. I do a radio program on 246BajanVibesRadio.com. You can go to that website, 246BajanVibesRadio.com. I usually am on that radio program from 9 a.m. till 10 a.m. every Saturday morning. I did not do a radio program this Saturday because I had an emergency maintenance call-out job to accomplish for one of my customers, so I had to postpone this Saturday's operation. But next Saturday, hopefully, I'll be able to rejoin the radio program, and that broadcasts to 36 different countries and the entire Caribbean region. I've basically there's a lot of my content on 3 Telegram channels. You could go to a Telegram channel called Caribbean Region, and then there's the Caribbean Adverse Reactions and Events, which was set up as a result of the excess death mortality that we were experiencing here in Barbados as a result of the COVID-19 biological weapons agenda. And then there's another Telegram channel called the Caribbean COVID Crimes Evidence. This particular channel is not only the latest news that's happening across the region with regard to the biological weapons agenda, but also has documentation, and all of my radio programs are there as well.
Okay, great.
You can reach me on WhatsApp as well. Just look up Fred Corbin, and you can just add me in there if you wish to make contact. I don't have a YouTube channel. I don't have a Rumble channel or anything like that. I don't have the time to maintain it. I'm too busy otherwise.
Maybe you need to get somebody to do that because you have so much knowledge in your head, Mr. Corbin. I don't know how. One of the reasons I actually started a YouTube channel, I told my uncle, is that I would have gone crazy because with all of the knowledge in my head and you want to get it out sometimes, you have to find an outlet. And oftentimes the papers like the Gleaner and perhaps the Barbados Nation, they don't want us to publish what we want to talk about. So I have to find an outlet. And even here, sometimes they're also repressing and suppressing your speech. But, for the most part, you can say some things here that maybe I can't say in the Gleaner or in the Barbados Nation. Now, Mr. Corbin, the topic is a very timely topic. We're talking about the war on terror, which we heard about after 9/11, but which we understand now is right home, right here with us in the United States territory and also in the Caribbean. Now, is the U.S. bringing the war home through the militarization in the Caribbean and Latin America? What do you think, Mr. Corbin? Do you think the U.S. is finally bringing the war home by militarizing the Caribbean and Latin American region?
No, I don't think so. I think I think they're sticking to an agenda that is already a failure. They're sticking to an agenda that they have done before, and the agenda that is playing out as we see right now in Venezuela is virtually a carbon copy of what took place in 1964 in the Tonkin Gulf incident that led to the congressional legislation that allowed the war in Vietnam to proceed. And we have to think carefully about what exactly is America trying to achieve here. Well, first of all, the reason that I don't agree with the militarization of the Caribbean region is that while the Roosevelt Agreement, as I have spoken about before, with the exchange of warships for bases in the Caribbean and so on that took place in 1941, while that is still in effect, the United States does not have the means nor the funding to militarize the Caribbean region unless there is a direct national security threat to the United States of America. And there is nothing in the Caribbean region that is a direct national security threat to the Caribbean region. Venezuela is not a national security threat to the Caribbean region or the United States of America. None of the territories in the Caribbean region are direct threats to the national security of the United States of America. Not even Cuba. Cuba right now is, in my opinion, probably less of a threat than any one of the other Caribbean territories, simply because it has adopted the Belt and Road Initiative, has signed on to preliminary membership with the BRICS Alliance, and has taken the Chinese model of non-aggression and economic development in play, and is now no longer a threat or a perceived threat to the United States of America, even although the United States of America is still hanging on to the sanctions that have crippled that country. And this takes us back to the words of Lord Salisbury, who was the British Prime Minister of England in 1877, when he noted that, and I quote, "The communist era in politics is sticking to the carcass of dead policies." And what we have here is precisely that. Here in the Caribbean, we're seeing America sticking to the carcass of a dead policy of regime change through military posturing and eventual military action. And we have to remember that we've seen this many, many times before. And we have to understand what exactly is happening. And this is what is known as a false flag prep guide. Okay? And we saw that happen this week when the United States Navy sank a fishing pirogue that just had 11 people on it that were trying to flee the country. Okay? But the false flag prep guide is 4 stages. Number 1, fund them, train them, and arm them. Number 2, unleash them. Number 3, expose them. Then you issue the false flag, you put the false flag action in place, and then you wage war on them. And we have seen that happen from the Gulf of Tonkin incident right the way through to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Africa, you name it. Okay, same thing in Iran. Exactly the same thing. It's just that their policy in Iran has failed miserably, and they're now preparing for stage 2. But what's happening in Venezuela is the false flag agenda. Okay, they've armed Venezuela, they've funded them, and so on, and now they're going to try to expose them based on a false assumption that Maduro is some leader of some cartel. Well, what we have to remember is that the Cartel of the Suns is a made-up name by journalists that the United States State Department has adopted and had its origins in the Nicaragua Sandinista regime under Oliver North.
Now, 2 things I want to say, Fred, based on what you've said. The threat can be real or imagined, and that is what we've seen in Iraq, we've seen in Iran, we have seen in all the countries in which the United States has been. Another thing I always say when people say the U.S. hasn't won the war, not in the way that we want the U.S. to win the war. The U.S., if it can get inside the country, change the texture, the landscape of the country, has won that war, even though it is chaos inside the country, but they would have achieved what they wanted. They've achieved what they wanted in Iraq, and they got Saddam Hussein out. And I'm sure they were able to arrest the oil fields or the resources that they wanted. So once they get that, they capture the land, they capture the resources, they would have won. But we often think about winning a war in terms of coming back where, you don't have lots of deaths and collateral damages. But the United States is not concerned about that. Neither the death of their soldiers or the death of citizens. Now, on that basis, I would like to ask you the question. If it is not militarization, what is happening on the streets of Washington, D.C., where we're seeing the National Guards on the streets, and Trump is also declaring to send the National Guards and the soldiers to Chicago, to New York, and other states of the United States. What would you say? What would you define that as?
That's a self-preservation action.
Mm-hmm.
This is about preserving the continuity of government
Mm-hmm.
in preparation for the financial collapse of the United States dollar. And that has
Yes.
just been accelerated by what has been achieved at the Shanghai Cooperative Organization Council and Summit that took place in China this week,
Mm-hmm.
where the de-dollarization went into full effect.
Mm-hmm.
And the invigorating of the structure of the gold-backed commodities has now taken precedent. And what's going to happen in the United States of America within the coming months is a complete collapse of the financial system. And this will lead
Yes.
to massive civil insurrection.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States of America is taking the precaution of protecting the five main cities in its central structure in order
Yes.
to be able to preserve some continuity of government.
Yes.
I don't think it's going to work, but
Mhm.
we have to hope and pray that good sense prevails and that the loss of life can be mitigated. But what we're actually seeing happening right before our eyes is the descent of the United States of America into civil war, simply
Mhm.
because the main pillars of the United States and its trade relations with the rest of the world are being chopped from beneath its own feet by the policies of the Trump administration and the
Mhm.
distractions that are happening to keep the public occupied with Venezuela and various other things like this and the Epstein files and all that utter nonsense is just a protracted avenue that is a precursor to eventual collapse. That's
Mhm.
how I read it. There are other people that may have a different opinion, but
Yeah.
that's how I read it because we've seen these things happen.
Yeah.
We saw what happened in Greece when the
Mhm.
financial collapse happened just pre-COVID in 2018 and so on. We saw what happened in other European countries where the military were brought in to protect the cities, and when people didn't have access to finance, what happened, and so on. And this is just on a larger scale. You see,
Yes. Mhm.
unfortunately, the population of the world has a very short memory due
Correct.
to the media overload of
Mhm.
continuous distraction and false information.
Mhm.
And what we're seeing happening in the United States of America, in my opinion, is the beginning of the end.
Yes. Now, and the United States, would you agree, is perhaps at the final stage of its empire? And normally, an empire is going to, once it reaches the final stage and it realizes that, especially the United States, where it says it's a democracy, but it's not a democracy, it understands that the only way to protect its empire is to militarize the empire. So now we don't have what you call, diplomacy, a foreign policy by diplomacy. What we have is a militarized diplomacy, or foreign policy throughout the entire globe. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, and the classic and stark examples that we have right now are, on the one hand, you have the BRICS alliance at the SCO summit that took place this week in Tianjin in China.
Mhm.
And while all of those countries have vast differences in their operational status and their financial structures and the way that they do business with other countries and so on, the overarching cooperation with regard to a new financial structure of how they are going to conduct their business going into the latter half of the 21st century is in direct, stark relation to the United States of America, who is still clinging to the carcass of the dead policy that military action guarantees their security and their prosperity.
Mhm.
And technically speaking, it is true because when
Yeah.
the United States was removed from the gold standard, they had to print money to support the operations that they did. They wanted to
Correct.
they weaponized that cheap money.
Yes.
And now the birds have come home to roost
Mhm.
because gold has been restructured to a 30-year high. And the entire global economy, of which BRICS alliance is 62%, has shifted to the east. And now the destitution of the failed policies that the United States of America is clinging so desperately to resound solely or rely solely on militarization, because
Hmm.
without a war going on to drive the military industrial complex, jobs
Absolutely.
can't be created, money
Hmm.
can't be printed, all of these
Hmm.
things start to collapse. And what
Hmm.
we're seeing is the collapse of the criminal empire, of the
Hmm.
fraud of the central banks, the fraud of the financial system, and the fraud of the Federal Reserve.
Hmm.
Okay? Because
Hmm.
that's all it was. It was nothing more than a fraud,
So
where
the
everything
emperor,
was
right,
weaponized.
right. So the emperor has lost its clothes, and the
Absolutely.
only thing it can resort to now is militarism. And that is
That's
what we're
correct.
suggesting here, that nothing is wrong with having a military, but we're talking about imperialism and militarism, which are Siamese twins. And, it was Chalmers Johnson in his book, The Sorrow of Empire, Militarism, Secrecy, and the End of the Republic,
Hmm.
who wrote here a prologue, in his prologue to his book, as distinct from other peoples on the earth, most Americans do not recognize, this is what he said, or do not want to recognize that the United States dominates the world through its military power. That is how
Precisely.
it dominates the world. It does
Yes.
not dominate the world through diplomacy. It dominates the world through its military power. Due to government secrecy, they are often ignorant of the fact that their government garrisons the globe. They do not realize that a vast network of American military bases on every continent except Antarctica actually constitutes a new form of empire. But what I'm suggesting here, Fred, is that the empire has gotten home. We heard about the war on terror, and it was, what's his name, Saddam Hussein, and all these people, the Muslims, the people in the Middle East. Now we're hearing that criminal networks, as we're hearing Marco Rubio, I don't know if you saw his speech in Ecuador, where he's saying that all of these transnational criminals, these drug lords, they are now terrorists. So we are now seeing where the war on terror has arrived home, not only on the Caribbean and Latin America, but also on US shore. Could you expound on that a little bit for our audience?
Well, first of all, we have to determine what you call terrorism,
Yes.
and the determination of the war on terror was nothing more than a fictional enclave that was propagated by the George Bush administration,
Yes.
following the following the very intricate planning from 1999 all the way through to 2001, and in the takedown of the World Trade Center by the Department of Defense, the Israeli Mossad, the United States military, as well as every single member of Congress, knowing about what was going to happen before it did. We do have to define what the war on terror was actually all about.
Mm-hmm.
The war on terror was actually the enclave that the United States used as plausible deniability in
Mm-hmm.
order to be able to bring about military action against the Middle Eastern countries of Afghanistan, namely Osama bin Laden being the principal bad guy, even although he was ensconced comfortably in Lebanon at the time.
Correct.
And and then
And was their guy too. Yeah.
it was multiplied from there across the Middle East, and going into other areas, and also many other countries where there had already been a predetermined
Mm-hmm.
outcome that there would be 7 countries and 7 wars,
Mm-hmm.
including the latest collapse of Syria, which was the last bastion that was holding out against the Israeli aggression. And then the whole terror situation began to shift towards the focus on the narco operators. But
Yes.
we have to ask ourselves the question: who funds the narco operators?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for that we have to look no further than the City of London.
Yes.
The corporation of the City of London is the principal architect, along with the Rothschild organization and Israeli Mossad and MI6, that created the structure for Britain to use the City of London to enhance the drug trade globally and turn it into a massive corporate effort
Mhm.
that supported the surveillance, the maintenance, and the intelligence and reconnaissance of the entire global architecture for domination through neocolonialism. The
Yeah.
City of London. You take out the City of London, you take out Washington, D.C., and the war on terror and narco-terrorism disappears like steam in the desert. Bye, gone.
Now, the fact that you
The criminals are not in Latin America. These guys are just opportunists. These guys are getting paid for market access. That's what they're
Mhm.
being paid for. Okay,
Mhm.
and it's given them a lot of wealth. However, the real terrorists, the real criminals, are sitting in pinstripe suits in the City of London and in Washington, D.C.,
Correct.
making the policy that the puppets such as President Trump and all the rest of it will stand on stage and say, oh, this is a war on terror and this is a war on drugs. The war on drugs has been going on since the 1950s because it is controlled opposition, and the war
Yes.
on terror was just another avenue to support that. Simple.
Absolutely. We know that the entire war is fake. However, we cannot negate the fact that it is having the terrorist effects on our lives,
Oh,
that our
absolutely.
lives are being controlled as we speak. I published a video the other day on my other channel, Caribbean and Latin American News Now, about the fact that Trinidad is the only country so far in the Caribbean that is supporting. I mean, formally speaking, we don't know what the other presidents are saying, who are formally supporting what the U.S. is doing in with the warship sent in the Caribbean Sea. And many Trinidadians were responding very respectfully. They were saying to me that you don't understand the fact that we have, a lot of crime here in our country caused by Venezuelans, and they have bought into the narrative because they think that with the U.S. being there, they are here in the Caribbean, that they're going to be protected. Now, what would you say to these Trinidadians who think that being on the siding with the U.S. is going to help to clean up their country?
Well, I will say this. There is nothing wrong with siding with the United States of America if you want protection.
Okay.
However, the misunderstanding by the average man on the street in Trinidad, as well as some politicians who believe that the United States is there to protect them in some form or fashion, is a delusional enterprise in itself, simply because nobody bothered to take the time during the Biden administration to actually investigate what was really happening geopolitically in the Caribbean region, that was being the architecture of what was being put in place in the Caribbean region by Caribbean leaders themselves, who were being instructed from within the OECD and the Biden administration to create the problem within Venezuela, to build the narrative for the regime change that we see now being implemented, and use Trinidad as the staging point for illegal immigration, weapons trafficking, narco trafficking, and the trafficking of human organs.
Yes.
Okay? Now, the United States of America reinforced this position quietly, without publicizing it, by by fomenting the Guyana-Venezuela dispute. And they used the Prime Minister of Barbados to do it.
Yes.
The Prime Minister of Barbados was the one that kicked the whole shebang off the edge of the cliff and started the fomentation of the Guyana-Venezuela dispute. The United States quietly followed through by installing no less than 16 CIA forward operating locations on the Guyanese Essequibo Venezuela border. These bases were used to recruit Venezuelans who were fed up with the US inspired socio-domestic issues in the country to go into Venezuela. Guyana was used as a conduit for mercenaries to be imported into the Venezuelan country via the Guyanese border in order to be able to foment unrest within Venezuela, and then to bring about the increase in the Tren de Aragua release through corrupt military officials that Maduro still does not have control over, and use Trinidad as the operation center for human trafficking into the United States of America, weapons trafficking, murder, and extortion. And that is precisely what happened under the PNM government in Trinidad and Tobago, and precisely what was fomented by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Amor-Motley. And understand one thing very clearly. The evidence and these facts were put before President Trump, and he was see the documentation which has been gathered by Russian intelligence within Venezuela, there will be a tribunal within 2 weeks.
But Marco Rubio, when the CELAC, the Caribbean community the Community of Caribbean States and Latin American States, they actually challenged Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, that if they are not suggesting that Nicolas Maduro, for example, is not, all the allegations leveled at him, they're not saying that some of them might not be true. What they're saying is that they should go through the right process, through the legal processes. Rubio is saying, no, whatever the president says, that is the final word. The United States does not have to depend on the United Nations, nor on any inter-American criminal court or whatever. The U.S. has the final say. Now, the U.S. therefore is not there to protect Trinidad and Tobago, then you'd agree, Fred. And I want to read, those of you who might not understand, an expression given by Henry Kissinger, who was a former Secretary of State, in which he says, it might be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal.
That's correct.
Is fatal. So when we think that we are on the side of the United States, it appears that they're doing well for us. But eventually, down the road, we're going to understand that it is going to be to our death. And that is something that the Trinidadians have to understand. And I've been saying to them, they have to look at, as you have explained, Fred, the root cause of the problem. If they explore the root cause, then they will be able to understand that I am not here suggesting that Nicolas Maduro is innocent and that he should be treated as a saint. We're suggesting that diplomacy should be the way forward, and not that you're just going to send military and take out a government that, without any form of democratic processes. That is my understanding. That is my opinion. I'm not sure what you think, but I know what you think, Fred. Let's move into, how do you think the rising military presence in the region will affect countries like Jamaica, Guyana, Haiti, and beyond, the Latin American and the Caribbean in general?
Well, we have to look at it in the context of what is the United States of America looking to achieve by placing military forces in the Caribbean region. First and foremost, the United States of America only deploys military forces when it wants to gain a geopolitical position.
Right.
And the geopolitical position that is at most risk right now in the entire Caribbean region is not Venezuela. Because while Venezuela has vast resources of oil and gas and gold, the entire oil resources that Venezuela taps into extends all the way to the southern shores of the United States of America. There is no reason to invade or take over Venezuela and deem it as a national security risk to the United States of America or a geopolitical incident in which to deploy a military. However, the most important geopolitical asset in the United States sphere of focus and interest right now is the Panama Canal, simply because it is owned by China.
Yes.
The Panama Canal was basically invested in by the Chinese to the tune of $10 billion, and the Panamanian government allowed China to invest in it with the understanding that China would have priority with regard to its large volume of exports and shipping going into Africa and into the eastern seaboard of the United States of America. A lot of people have asked the question, why isn't China defending its right to the Panama Canal, even although they have invested $10 billion in that facility? And the answer is this. The Panama Canal is only 5% of China's global export potential in relation to what it can access with regard to its Southeast Asian partners. And with the opening of the Arctic Circle new sea route, which where you can take a ship from Shanghai all the way to Norway via the Arctic Circle, the Panama Canal is no longer of that relevance, simply because the distance to travel during the Arctic Sea route is virtually half of that of sailing all the way from China across the Pacific Ocean just to get to the Isthmus of Panama in order to be able to go through and come into the Atlantic Ocean. There's
Yes.
no longer any need for that. You can leave China, come through the Arctic Circle, come through past Iceland and Newfoundland into the North Atlantic, and you're there days in advance of going across the Pacific Ocean. So China is not going to contest the Panama Canal in the same way as America perceives it will. The economic interest will still remain. However, China has an ace up its sleeve with regard to access to the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean region. And that is, it has already drawn plans and invested in those plans with the government of Honduras, where you can dig a new Panama Canal into the Central Lake District of Honduras and connect into the Caribbean region at far less cost than digging a new Panama Canal, simply because Honduras is low-lying like Belize, and it doesn't have the mountainous terrain in the areas that they're talking about with regard to putting the new canal. So it's far more expeditious to do that in Honduras. Not only that, but the canal that you would dig in Honduras has the facility of a large lake in the middle of it, which is supplied rather than by rainfall, like how the Gatun Lake in Panama is supplied purely by rainfall. This lake is supplied by subterranean aquifers, so you do not have the issue of rising and lowering water levels, which can shut the canal down. Honduras is actually the prime optimum location for China to do this. And I've seen the plans for the Honduras Canal, and it is 4 times the size of Panama. So imagine this. Imagine a canal where you can actually create a Central American post-Panamax distribution hub for shipping that can handle 36 post-Panamax vessels per day if required.
Yes.
Panama Canal can only handle 40. Okay.
Yeah. Now let's look at some of the some of the comments. Well, we just have some that this guy here, Antot Masuka, has the age of secret is over. Do you agree with that, Mr.
Well,
Corbin?
I totally agree, and
Yeah.
I would like to thank Edward for joining the program.
Okay.
I know him personally.
Oh, you do?
And,
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I know him personally, and
Okay.
very, very insightful individual when it comes
Yeah,
to
he is.
understanding this particular issue.
Yes.
And if there was anyone that could join this live right now, it could be him, because he has insights in certain areas that I may not have.
And I would like to invite him another time. I have the first
So
time
at the end of the day,
Yes.
the most important thing here is that understanding the geopolitical narrative and understanding what is happening in the Caribbean region with regard to the neo-colonialism or the renewal of the neo-colonialism that the United States of America is trying to push on the Caribbean region in order to secure its main asset in Panama is absolutely of their prime focus. Because if they can secure Venezuela and deny Venezuela's input into the BRICS alliance, they would have scored massively in destabilizing the BRICS alliance influence in the Western Hemisphere. However, the chances of that happening are very remote, because China has already invested massively in Venezuela and has been invested in Venezuela since 2010 and before.
Yeah.
And what we actually see is in Venezuela right now is we see Chinese military vehicles being deployed by Venezuelan forces, which were delivered in 2010 and 2011. Okay, the Chinese military is actually the Chinese military vehicles have actually been delivered and are part of the Venezuelan military. The Venezuelan military purchased these vehicles as part of the oil infrastructure deal with regard to their application into the BRICS alliance. The China Development Bank said to Venezuela, if we can sign a preliminary economic and security agreement with you upon your application to the BRICS Security Council, then China Development Bank has the wherewithal to export military hardware and so on and so forth and weapons into Venezuela. The United States of America is a bit peeved about this because they exported 31 F-16 fighter jets into Venezuela under the Chavez regime when the oil boom was going on down there before they decided to assassinate the country. And those F-16s have since been modernized by the Chinese and are now back in the air. And two of them buzzed a U.S. warship yesterday for the second time, and they were not shot down. Why were these Venezuelan fighters not taken out of the sky if what Trump is saying is going to war? You see, you have to determine the difference between geopolitical posturing and the actual implementation of action, because Trump is weighing very carefully. If I take action and shoot down Venezuelan fighter jets that are flying over their territorial waters, and I am in international waters, that is an act of war.
Yeah.
And Congress has not yet authorized the president to go to war with Venezuela.
Yeah, but Congress doesn't have to, and that's the whole point. Congress has relinquished its role for many years, and from the war on terror was actually promulgated, Congress has not been functioning in that capacity. The presidents have single-handedly gone to war. We know the Patriot Act actually gives them that sort of power to do so, and many Americans don't understand. And that's one day they're going to wake up to see that the Constitution is no longer the Constitution that they know, because the Patriot Act has actually supplanted the U.S. Constitution, and that is what we need to wake up and see.
Yeah, that is correct.
Go ahead, Mr.
That is correct. But the Congress of the United States of America should still formally be in a position to say, okay, we agree with this, and so on and so forth. Now, the other problem that we have is that if the United States of America is maintaining a posture outside of Venezuela, as they did in Brazil in 1964, they did the same thing in Brazil in 1964. They lined up outside Brazil and were there for months on end. Nothing happened. Is the United States of America now in a situation where they're trying to coerce the geopolitical situation in Venezuela by doing the same thing, to build global and regional opinions with regard to, number one, a false opinion on Maduro being the leader of a fictitious cartel, the Cartel of the Suns. Two, are they trying to force Venezuela to give up its BRICS alliance membership with and capitulate to American geopolitical and economic interests? And number three, most importantly, are they trying to seduce the population of Venezuela to take action against the president? This is the most important, because remember, sanctions are designed to hurt the people of a country.
Correct.
They're not designed for profit. They're not designed to benefit anyone. They're designed to hurt the people of a country so that the people then take action against the government and set the stage for America to move in and restore order. This, in my opinion, is the most important asset in America's arsenal right now, trying to influence the population to take action against Maduro. But it has backfired because
another point, though, Fred, is that if they are successful in deposing Maduro, they're sending a strong message. The U.S. military is sending a strong message to the rest of the region: you don't play with us, and whatever we want, we will get. And it might take 20 years, it might take 30 years, and we might have to posture, because, of course, Venezuela is not an easy country to go into, like Jamaica. When they wanted Dodos, they could just go there and get it, no time. Venezuela is not going to be that easy, a fish to fry. But let's look at Nehemiah, who is making this point. So as a layperson like myself, then what is the real purpose then of the USA being in the Caribbean? Are they just posturing then? With the warships, are they just posturing, or are they sending us a message?
Well, you can answer that in two ways. You can answer that the application of military force with regard to coercing Venezuela is definitely going to be a military action in the future. And at the same time, it can be a posturing action in order to coerce regional opinion to comply with U.S. demands. Now, we have to remember that the United States of America's hegemony financially in the Caribbean region
Mhm.
is absolute.
Yes.
Okay? Every single Caribbean territory is tied to the United States dollar. And it goes
Yes.
right back to 1941, as I said, where the Roosevelt Agreement basically hegemonized the entire Caribbean region under the United States dollar because of the Warships for Military Bases Agreement. That it's allowed the United States of America to reinforce the Monroe Doctrine so that no other territory or no other foreign power could come into the region and threaten the soft underbelly of the United States of America.
Mhm.
So at the end of the day, we have to understand that the most important underlying reason that the United States of America can play in its own backyard is because it put that policy in place in 1941, and
Mhm.
that policy and that treaty still exists.
Mhm.
So whether they're posturing or whether they're in military action, they can still do as they please
Yes.
because of that. Okay.
Yes. Because we call that psychological warfare, the posturing there.
Yes.
So they're trying to
Yes.
break you, and then after eventually you might just say,
Yes.
okay, enough is enough.
Yeah.
Now, Entente is also, Masuka is also, the USA Constitution ended in 1871. US incorporated, and all states are under martial law. Hence, military rule through democracy. There is no USA. What do you say to that?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That is absolutely correct. The original Constitution of 1776 ended in 1871, and Washington, D.C. became U.S. Incorporated, United States Incorporated, not the United States of America. This is one of the reasons why it's very important to understand why Donald Trump said the Gulf of America.
Yes.
That's symbolism for him
Yes.
restoring the 1776 Constitution.
Yes.
Okay? And
Yes.
hence, ever since Donald Trump took power, we see the International Monetary Fund returning to the gold standard.
Mhm.
This signals very, very clear intent. However, is it going to be too late? Because the ball is rolling toward collapse because of the financial burden that the United States of America is under. And what I personally believe is that the United States of America has to collapse financially before it can actually get back on its feet. However, the far-reaching effects of that collapse is also going to affect the Caribbean region very, very negatively.
Absolutely.
Because we're tied to the United States dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have an oil and gas industry other than to rely on Trinidad and Tobago to send us fuel when when our lights start to go out. And I don't see one single Caribbean prime minister at this point in time that has taken the step of sitting down and negotiating with Guyana or Trinidad for fuel supplies in the event that the United States of America can no longer maintain its overall capacity of industrial action or industrial support. Okay.
No,
because most of our fuel, most of the fuel for all of the Caribbean islands comes from the United States of America, a little bit from Trinidad, some from other suppliers, but the predominant amount comes from the United States.
The States, yes. Now, when I think of the United States, I think about two centers of power. We have the democratic state, or whatever is remains of the democratic state. We can't ignore that there is some democracy in the United States. I've lived there, and we've seen that it's not as autocratic as we think it is. There are some elements remaining because of the remnants of the Constitution that still prevails. However, I don't agree with many commentators, political commentators, that the U.S. empire is collapsing. I believe that the democratic state is collapsing, what you call the republic. However, you can't be investing $1 trillion per annum into this industry and think it's going to collapse overnight. It's not going to happen. I think it's going to be here for a while. What is collapsing and will collapse overnight is the democratic state, what we call the Republican state. What do you think, Mr. Fred, about that?
I think you're on target with regard to that, and I don't think that the collapse is going to come as some cataclysm. It's going to be a staged drawdown.
Yes.
Where you're going to go through a severe stage of austerity in several different stages, and then the rebuilding of not an empire but of a new republic that will take action on different levels. But the United States of America will shrink to one of self-security rather than international oligarchy.
I like that.
Right now, the United States still believes that it has the power of a global oligarch.
Yes.
It's 700 military bases, and it can project its power anywhere in the region because it has the most powerful navy, and so on, and various things like that. That global oligarchy is shrinking fast.
Yes.
And I think the United States of America is going to be able to come back home to itself and rebuild itself based upon the principles of 1776. And I think that the sooner that the Republican Party arrives at that point, the better off it's going to be for everybody.
Anton is saying that the U.S. Incorporated collapsed November 2nd, 1999. Hence, all presidents, including Donald Trump, since then are unlawful operating under a false flag. What do you think?
That is correct. That is correct. Simply because the implementation of the martial law and so on had to come full circle, and that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what happened, and hence one of the reasons why there is no constitutional order in the United States of America. And the president has the ultimate say. This is a law of the jungle situation where the United States is doing as it pleases because of the global oligarch status, or a perceived global oligarch status, and is in a position where it can impose its own self-governance upon those states that cannot have no ability to resist. Do you see the United States of America doing what we see happening here in the Caribbean to countries in the Asia Pacific region?
No.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
Remember now to like the live and share the live with as many people. We're going to have probably about 14 more minutes before we end the live. Please send your questions. We want to know what questions you have for Mr. Corbin. Since we're here, we want to know that you're part of the conversation. So please send your questions, your comments, and we will be sure to answer and to expound on any questions you have. Now, is this really about protecting democracy, as they're saying, Mr. Corbin, or is it more about controlling trade routes and resources? As you know, they're telling us about this transnational crime element and drug trafficking. But are they really trying to protect us from drug traffickers, or is it just about controlling our natural resources in the Caribbean, Latin American region?
Well, when was the last time that you heard protecting democracy being spoken by the United States of America?
Good question.
That was right before they went into Iraq, and under the pretext of weapons of mass destruction, protect democracy. Anything that you hear coming out of the United States of America that says the word protect and democracy means we're going to war.
The opposite. Yeah, the opposite.
Exactly.
Because war is peace.
Precisely. And we have to be very clear with regard to the understanding of the historical context of when America says things. People don't take notice of the real meaning. Yeah. And the protection of democracy in the Caribbean region is the carte blanche phrase that will be used for regime intervention and change in Venezuela if the United States of America decides that it's going to do so. However, should the United States of America decide on the ill-advised intervention within Venezuela, they decide to invade Venezuela, they automatically include Colombia in that conflict one time.
Yes.
Without even thinking. Colombia is going to and the thing is, we have satellite imagery and intelligence that Colombia has amassed 4 battalions of its military on the Venezuela border to support the Maduro regime. Not only that, but you also drag Brazil into the mix, because BRICS founding member Brazil and Venezuela, BRICS alliance kind of potential full membership pending, they are going to support each other. And all it takes is for the Brazil to suspend all economic activity with the United States of America, Colombia to close its ports to U.S. imports and exports, and the ball is out of the court.
Yes.
Okay? Because you shut down the main port in Colombia, Barranquilla. If you shut down Barranquilla port, where the United States shipping cannot access, the United States of America, southern quadrant of economics influence, grinds to a halt in 24 hours. Bang, done. Not only that, but you are also going to influence Panama to take similar action, where instead of ships being able to be allowed to come into the Panama Canal, the Panamanian government will block the Panama Canal. All they have to do is tell the workers, right, it's time to go on strike. Do that. Because Panama not only took the very fortuitous step of training all of the Panamanian workers that control the Panama locks, but unionizing them under a national union head. You mess around with the Panama Canal and you mess with that union, you're out to lunch.
You're out. Yeah.
Game over.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've always thought that Colombia was an arm of the United States.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Wow,
The United States of America maintains two bases in Colombia, but they have been very significantly reduced in their operations, and the United States of America no longer has any influence in the level of training and integration with the Colombian military as it once did before.
Okay.
The most important thing to remember here is that the balance of power can shift very quickly because of ill-advised stupidity on the part of the Republican administration.
Wow. Anton is also saying, Masuka, a constitutional convention is needed to restore the USA, which more than 75% of the states agreed to have, but it has been blocked, kept secret, and delayed. A constitutional convention is needed, and I would say yes, but wouldn't we have to replace it with how are we going to get rid of the Patriot Act? 1, 2, and probably 3. How are we going to get rid of that, Mr. Corbin?
Well, the only way that you're going to get rid of the Patriot Act is by dismantling AIPAC. Okay? The American Israel the lobby that controls both houses of Congress and the United States government is the one that designed the Patriot Act, because it gave them carte blanche authority to utilize the United States government to pursue the aims in the Middle East of Israel. So if you're going to get rid of the Patriot Act, you have to get rid of AIPAC first, because they're the ones that designed it, and they're the ones that maintain it, and they're the ones that fund it to make sure that it still stays in place. Okay? So once you get rid of AIPAC and you get rid of the Israel lobby, which is not going to happen anytime soon, then the Patriot Act will remain in place.
We have a difference in opinion there, Mr. Corbin. I think that the AIPAC is controlled by the U.S. military-industrial complex. It's an arm of the military. The U.S. is using AIPAC as a means of saying, oh, we are not going to be associated with your dirty work, so you're the one responsible for that. But behind the scenes, the U.S. military-industrial complex controls Israel.
Actually, you're correct on one hand and incorrect on the other.
Okay.
The part that you're incorrect on is that AIPAC are the ones that fund the U.S. military industrial complex, because every single one of the companies that are in the group of the U.S. military industrial complex are financed and majority shareholder by members of the AIPAC.
Yes, but
every single company.
How would you argue that the seeds of the U.S. military empire had already been laid from 1898?
Yes, of course, because
and AIPAC came into being way afterwards.
Yes, AIPAC became into being way after, but the influence was still there. Who do you think funded the First World War? Who do you think funded the Second World War? Who do you think supported and funded Adolf Hitler? Who do you think formed the Nazi Party? AIPAC. Okay, the same people that formed AIPAC after post-World War II were the ones that formed the support for the Nazi Party in Germany. That's why it was called Nazi, National Alliance and Zionist Party. It was known as the Zionist Party before. Then it became AIPAC. Okay, the Zionists have been in the United States of America since 1871 or before. It's just that they have built their influence through the integration through every single facet of government. At the moment, AIPAC runs America.
Okay. Yes. Okay. We have Isaac Parrott is suggesting here that any country, I would think, pursuing economic independence is a threat to America. Venezuela is a threat because I guess the country has a massive oil reserve. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's a threat to the economic stability of the United States of America, given the fact that the most important, the most important development
Mm-hmm.
within the geopolitical hemisphere at this point in time, within the last 7 days, has been the cooperation of China and Russia in the Great Siberian 2
Mm-hmm.
pipeline, which was designed specifically to bring natural gas from Siberia to Europe. Now
Mm-hmm.
that has been rediverted through Mongolia and is now going to China. Not
Mm.
only that, but right after the SCO summit in Tianjin,
Mm-hmm.
the OPEC countries, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, and Oman, have all
Mm-hmm.
agreed to raise their oil output by 137,000 barrels per day. What does
Wow.
this what does this do for the United States hegemony? The United
Yes.
States of America is now scrambling to be able to make sure that the agreements that they have made with Europe can actually be finalized.
Mm-hmm.
Trump flew over to Europe, and the EU Commissioner von der Leyen basically made one of the biggest political blunders in human history when she agreed to purchase $700 billion of hydrocarbon exports from the United States of America to Europe at four
Mm.
times the price they were getting it from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But they blew up
They blew up the
they they
pipeline.
blew
Yeah.
up the pipelines. They've now
Yeah.
shut down all hydrocarbon exports from Russia to Europe, and they're basically in the dark. And now they're scrambling. And the United States of America will not get paid a dime for anything that they send to Europe. Okay, they're not going to get paid because Europe is broke, absolutely dead broke. They're so broke they can't even pay attention.
Well, that's how they control you. They control you through your debt, right? Through controlling
Exactly.
you through IMF funds. Because right now I understand that England is about to join the IMF. The IMF is about to go
Absolutely.
into
Yeah.
England. So that they
Exactly.
love that. They love when you are broke and you have no money, so they control you. That's
Precisely.
what happened after the World War II, as you know, and that's why the US
Yep.
became the ultimate power. Now, there is a reading I would like before we end, Mr. Corbin, that suggests here killer drones and the militarization of US foreign policy. And it says here, the opening paragraph, the militarization of US foreign policy certainly didn't start with President Donald Trump. And I want everybody to understand that. In fact, it goes back several decades. However, if Trump's first 100 days in office are any indication, he has no intention of slowing down the trend. So this is what is happening. We must understand that even though we tend to think that Trump is the major, imperialist and he's the, anti-black and people of color, you must understand that the United States existed long before Trump. Its empire long before Trump. Trump is just, as some people are saying, the culmination of the U.S. empire and its mission for full spectrum dominance. Trump is not trying to hide the face of the U.S. Military empire. He's trying to say this is who we are, whether you like us or not. Biden and the others, and maybe Kamala would have done it too if had she won, but they try to put a nice and decent, a democratic face onto this military empire, but the emperor is slowly but surely losing the clothes that she wears. Now, what do you have to say in wrapping up, Mr. Corbin? We have about 2 minutes left. What would you say to us as a listening audience?
Well, I would say to every person who has joined us on this audience, first of all, we would like to thank everyone who has joined us on this audience, but we would
Yes.
also like to issue not only a warning to pay closer attention to what is actually happening in the region, because
Yes.
there's too much complacency, there's too much apathy, and there is not enough interest in the
Yes.
affairs of government by our people. And we need
Mm-hmm.
to stand up, wake up, step forward, and take hand for a prosperous Caribbean region and for the future of our children.
That's it. That's it. So we can wrap up here. And if you guys are interested, you let me and Mr. Corbin know if we should be here on live every Sunday. If that is what you want, we will try to give you what you need and what topics you're interested in, some of the guests that we probably can invite. And make sure you're liking the live and also you're sharing it with others. Thank you so much for joining, Mr. Corbin. And as usual, we will talk another time. So have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Have a
Okay,
great
all the
day.
best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day. See you in another one. Make sure you like and you share and you subscribe. Bye-bye. See you in another one. Ciao.